Good morning, all. Thank you for joining us. My name is Roland Mazuca. I've been asked to give this opening presentation because of the fact that I have deep roots in the neighborhood. So I'm going to start with my story. My family bought their first house, 2515 Monterey Street, in 1944, over 75 years ago. And the middle top picture is my family, uh, my mother, father, and my dog Courage. And then right under that is me and my mom sitting on the front porch on the swing, which I still own. And then that's my father on a snowy day on the right. And then on the left, there it's my grandparents, my godparents, and me, and or it might be my brother. I'm not sure. And then uh, they're standing in front of 2515 Monterey, and then the house behind the gentleman is the house I currently live in right now, 2511 Monterey. So I was born in the front room of that house 68 years ago, and of course I am partial to it for that reason. In 1970, my parents bought the house next door, and it is my current home. Both houses are over 100 years old. The first house is 110 years old. It was built in 1910. The old homestead, still very dear to me. It's filled with wonderful memories. My father was the oldest of his siblings, and all five brothers, at one time or another, lived in that house after they got married. I'm not sure how they did it. They closed off one of the bedrooms and it became a little apartment, I guess. And my grandfather, Avram Garcia, lived in the back corner room of that house for the last 13 years of his life. I remember riding my tricycle all through the house, and the doors were such that I would go through a corner of his room. And that was always the dangerous part because he would chase me with a cane, or at least feign like he was going to beat me up. I must have been 3 or 4 at the time. I'm still close to childhood friends. Rolando Briceño is a neighbor, Rita Maria Contreras and Marcela Contreras. Um, the times were very different then. We used to play in our front yard till 10 o'clock, not on a school night, but our parents didn't worry about it. Back doors were always unlocked. The Contreras' house is now a bank. The Briceños moved away, and all of our parents have died. I know the neighborhood has a reputation for being very dangerous, but Ruby and I, not my neighbor Ruby, but my dog Ruby and I, regularly walk, always in the evening, and sometimes as late as midnight. And I've never had any trouble, except for a couple of dogs, but they just yell, they just bark. A lot of influential people have roots and ties to this neighborhood. I meet many people who tell me that their grandparents lived or still live here. Lionel Sosa's family lived across the alley from me. My mother's family, the Garcias, the Briceños, the Contrerases, the Cisneros, and the Munguias, all within a couple of blocks of each other, are just a few of the neighborhood families I know who immigrated in the early 20th century to San Antonio from Mexico. This has had a profound effect on the city and our history. Mr. Munguia's print shop was a hotbed of political activity and was the start of many political lives, such as Henry B. Gonzalez and Henry Cisneros. I left the neighborhood a while to pursue my education and moved back in the early 80s to be able to rehab the old house and help my parents who were getting on in age. In 2005, after my mother's death, I purchased my brother's half of 2511 and moved in. And so these are a couple of pictures. If you go to the frame on the other side, or the first frame, there's 2 pictures I didn't say anything about, but maybe they don't need to be said. No, back. So that's on the upper left. That's my beautiful parents when they were married. And that's in the front room of 2515. That's my Aunt Vera and me, Christmas time. And then those other pictures were taken, and I included them because they on the next slide. I included them because it includes my neighbors. So this is the majority of these were taken at my parents' 50th anniversary, and they set up a big tent in the backyard. And my father was a musician. He's in the upper right playing the clarinet, and he had some of his buddies go, and my father played the clarinet and the saxophone, and the piano was always serenading the house and the neighborhood. And then below that is a picture of friends of mine. My Aunt Vera was in the first slide, is in that red dress, and Mr. Contreras is sitting with I guess a beer, and then Mr. Briceño is behind him talking to Susan Guerra. And then in the bottom left, again, Mr. Contreras, Mrs. Contreras, the beautiful Mrs. Contreras, talking to Mrs. Briceño. And then above that, it's the same cast of characters with my dear friend Becky Contreras in the middle there. She is a beautiful young woman with Down syndrome, one of my childhood friends. And there in the middle with my mother complaining about my father taking a picture in an undershirt was taken at some other family event. But back to the story and the reason for my being in favor of the historic designation. It's a desire to bring about a sense of pride in our neighborhood and honoring our history. Prospect Hill, another name for this area, was a suburb earlier in the century when Our Lady of the Lake College at that time was surrounded by fields and farms. Actually, it probably wasn't even a college back then. After World War II, people flocked to the newer suburbs. Our houses are not big and flashy homes, but they're well designed and solidly made, with good bones, as they say. Many of the homes just need a little TLC, a little tender loving care. And I would like as much as possible to keep our neighborhood away from flippers and developers who try to buy a cheap house, rehab, and sell at commercial rates. We all have received the calls and the postcards. I get them daily to buy our houses for cash. I even get some to buy my nephew's houses and such. I also want to protect the neighborhood from unnecessary demolitions. This historic designation overlay provides some protection in that demolitions must be approved by the city and they go through a process, and not, as what so often happens in San Antonio, especially before, was to be knocked down over the weekend or at night. Terry Castillo wrote a great op-ed piece in the Express News in yesterday's paper. If you have a chance to read it. It's good. She talks about inexpensive housing and the best housing being the existing housing and just fixing it up. I know this effort to designate our neighborhood as historic has fostered resentment in some people. It's all around me. And hopefully this meeting and others that will follow will dispel some of those misconceptions and clarify what historic designation really means. Thank you for listening to my story.